I'm Evelyn Carter, 68 years old, a retired high school teacher living in a quiet coastal town in Oregon. After 4 decades in the classroom, I thought I'd seen every kind of power play and selfishness people were capable of. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment my own son invited me to dinner, and instead of a meal, what waited for me was a folder of papers demanding I sign over my entire retirement fund to him. Just 3 months ago, I was still sleeping in the sunny, upstairs bedroom of my own home, the house I paid off after 36 years of hard work. Now, I've been moved into the cold, damp basement, right beneath the feet of the people who once called me family. They say it's just temporary until I find a new place. But with each passing day, I realized they had no intention of letting me leave, not until they got my signature on that paper. They thought I was old, weak, and willing to obey without question. What they didn't know was that every single day in that basement, I was planning, and the night I closed that folder, I also closed the chapter on being the victim they expected me to be. If you've ever believed you had to stay silent just because it's family, stick around and hear my story. Tell me where you're listening from, and I'll show you exactly how a woman like me turned the tables and took back everything. When I first handed my house key to my son, I told myself it was just for convenience. He and his wife, Vanessa, were moving in temporarily while their place was being renovated. They had a sweet way of making it sound like I was doing them a favor. In reality, I thought it might be nice to have family around again, to hear footsteps upstairs instead of the echo of an empty home. I didn't realize those footsteps would soon be running over my head in more ways than one. The first week felt almost normal. We shared coffee in the mornings. Vanessa made polite small talk, and my granddaughter, Lily, hugged me before school. But slowly, I began noticing small changes. The floral curtains I'd sewn myself disappeared, replaced by stark white blinds. My grandmother's oak table vanished from the dining room without a word. When I asked, Vanessa said it clashed with the aesthetic. My kitchen, my sanctuary, was reorganized until I could barely find my own teacups. It was Vanessa who first floated the idea of me moving downstairs. Just for a little while, she said, her smile tight as piano wire. Lily's school projects take up so much space, and the basement has that big storage area. It'll be cozy for you. Cozy wasn't the word I'd use. The air was damp enough to curl my hair in minutes, and the single window was small enough to make me feel like I'd fallen into a well. But I agreed, partly to keep the peace, partly because I told myself it was temporary. The truth started leaking out in quiet moments. I overheard Vanessa on the phone with a friend, saying, "Once she's settled down there, it'll be easier to get her to sign the papers." My stomach knotted. "What papers?" She laughed softly, like she was sharing a joke. "Her retirement fund is just sitting there. We can invest it for her, make it work for us." That last word, "us," hit me like ice water. I wanted to confront her right then, but I didn't. Instead, I filed the conversation away in the back of my mind, like a teacher noting the behavior of a student who thinks they're being clever. If I learned anything from decades in the classroom, it's that you never tip your hand too early. You wait, you watch. Life in the basement quickly became a silent battle. I'd hear them laughing upstairs over dinner, the clink of wine glasses, the scrape of chairs on the hardwood floors. I'd refinished myself 20 years earlier. Sometimes they'd send Lily down with a plate of food. But it was clear this wasn't about hospitality, it was about control. I was being managed, just like the unwanted furniture Vanessa sent to the garage for storage. The night they sprung their plan, I knew something was off the moment Vanessa appeared at the basement door in her heels and silk blouse. "Come on up, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We're having dinner." But when I got upstairs, there was no place set for me, just a manila folder in the middle of the table. Michael, my son, sat at the head of the table, leaning back like a CEO about to close a deal. "Mom," he said, "we've been thinking about your future. You've got all that money in your retirement account. And it's not doing you any good just sitting there. If you transfer it to us, we can invest it, get better returns. In the meantime, you stay here with us. No more worrying about rent or bills." I looked at that folder like it was a snake. Why would I give you my retirement savings? My voice was calm, but inside, something sharp was waking up. Michael smiled the way a salesman smiles when he thinks he's already made the sale. "Because we're family. We take care of each other." Family. That word should have warmed me. Instead, it felt like a knife. I thought about every lunch I'd packed instead of eating out, every vacation I'd skipped, every dress I'd mended instead of buying new, all so I could retire without being a burden. And here they were, ready to strip it all away with a pen stroke. "I'll think about it," I said, pushing the folder back toward him. His jaw tightened. "Mom, the timing is important." I said, "I'll think about it." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Vanessa's smile turned brittle, her eyes cold. "Of course," she said, "but you do understand, Evelyn, our arrangement can't be indefinite. This house has needs, expenses." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night, back in the basement, I sat on the edge of my cot, holding the folder. I could feel the weight of every page, every signature line they wanted filled. And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not just for what they were trying to take from me, but for the years I'd believed my sacrifices were building something worth protecting. But the tears didn't last long. In their place, something colder, harder began to form. I thought about the decades I'd spent managing classrooms, negotiating truces between rival cliques, coaxing the truth out of liars with nothing but patience and silence. Those skills hadn't vanished just because I'd retired. And if Michael and Vanessa thought I was going to hand over my life's work without a fight, they were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. The next morning, I took my first walk in weeks. The October air bit at my cheeks, but with every step, I felt stronger. I passed the coffee shop I used to visit, the park where Lily had learned to ride her bike. Each landmark reminded me of the life I'd built, not the life they wanted to shrink down to a basement. By the time I reached the corner cafe, I had the beginning of a plan. I didn't know then how much that walk would change everything. I didn't know who I'd run into, or how one conversation could turn the entire situation on its head. All I knew was that I was done being quiet, done being managed, and when the right moment came, I wouldn't just refuse to sign their papers, I'd make them wish they'd never even asked. The bell above the cafe door chimed as I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and fresh bread wrapping around me like a warm blanket. It had been months since I allowed myself this small luxury. Michael always called it wasting money to buy coffee when there was perfectly good instant at home his home. That is, but today wasn't about permission. Today was about breathing air that wasn't laced with damp concrete and the faint hum of a water heater. I stood in line, scanning the familiar blackboard menu, when a voice behind me stopped me cold. Evelyn Carter." It was deep, warm, and threaded with something I hadn't heard in years, genuine surprise. I turned, my heart doing a strange double beat, and there he was, Daniel Rhodes. I hadn't seen Daniel in over 40 years. Back then, we were both young and certain the world was ours for the taking. He'd been the boy who stayed late after study group just to walk me home. The one who wrote letters from the road when he took a job across the country. The one I didn't choose when my late husband, William, offered me stability instead of adventure. And yet, here he stood older, sharper, but with the same steady gaze that used to undo me. "Daniel," I said, the name coming out half breath, half smile. We moved to a booth in the corner, away from the steady clatter of mugs and milk steamers. Up close, I could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint silver threading through his hair. But he still carried himself like the man who once told me I could be anything. "I heard about William," he said gently, and I nodded. 3 years ago. I didn't explain how William's long illness had eaten up most of my savings, or how the silence afterward had been filled by Michael's generous offer to move in. That story, I suspected, was going to come out soon enough. He asked where I was living now, and the truth slipped out before I could stop it. In Michael's basement. The words hung there, heavy and humiliating. Daniel's brow furrowed. Basement Evelyn, what happened? So I told him about the temporary arrangement, the slow erosion of my space, and finally, the dinner table ambush with the manila folder. I left out the tears, but I saw in his face that he understood them anyway. "They're trying to take your retirement savings," he said flatly. "That's elder financial abuse." The phrase landed in my chest like a match striking dry tinder. I'd heard those words on the news, but always attached to strangers. "There are laws against it," he added, leaning forward. "And I'm guessing you haven't signed anything yet." I shook my head. "Good, then you still have control." When the waitress came, Daniel ordered for both of us without asking, just like he used to. A black coffee for him, a latte for me. "You hated black coffee," I said, smiling despite myself. "Still do," he admitted, "but I'm stubborn." Then he said something that made me sit up straighter. "I run roads development, now housing projects, commercial real estate. I need someone who understands people, neighborhoods, community outreach. You'd be perfect." I almost laughed. "Daniel, I'm 68. I haven't worked since I retired from teaching." He waved that away. "You've been managing situations your whole life. Believe me, I'd rather have someone who knows how to handle people than someone who just pushes paper." He told me the salary. My pulse skipped. It was more than my pension and Social Security combined. Enough for me to move out of the basement tomorrow. Enough for me to say no to Michael and mean it. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why now?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Because I should have chosen you 40 years ago. Because I heard about what happened. And I'm not going to stand by while someone tries to take what you've worked for." His words were steady, not romantic or rehearsed, just the kind of truth you can't fake. I told him I needed time to think, but by the time I left the cafe, my mind was already racing. I could see it, my own apartment, sunlight through clean windows, my name alone on the lease. I could see Michael's face when he realized I didn't need him, that I had options he couldn't control. That night, back in the basement, I didn't look at the manila folder. Instead, I opened my old laptop and typed out a resume. It felt strange, like dusting off a part of myself I'd packed away years ago. But with each word, I felt stronger. Community leadership. I wrote conflict resolution, budget management, skills honed in a classroom, but just as valuable in boardrooms as upstairs. I heard laughter, the kind that dripped with wine and self-satisfaction. It didn't sting the way it had before, because now I knew something they didn't. I wasn't trapped anymore. I had a way out. 2 days later, I met Daniel at his office. He handed me an offer letter and a key card. "Your office is on the 12th floor," he said. "Start Monday." The words felt surreal. I wasn't just walking away from the basement, I was walking back into my life. When I left that building, the autumn wind was sharp and clean. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel old. And for the first time in months, I let myself imagine the moment I'd slide that manila folder back across the table and tell Michael exactly where he could put it. He thought he was playing chess. What he didn't know was that I'd just switched boards entirely, and the next move, it was mine. Monday morning came with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was up before the alarm, dressed in my best navy blazer and cream blouse, hair smoothed, lipstick applied with care, down in the basement. I stood by the door with my handbag, waiting for the black sedan Daniel had promised would pick me up. At exactly 10:30, I saw it pull into the driveway through the tiny window. When I stepped outside, Michael was in the kitchen, coffee mug halfway to his lips. His eyes widened as he spotted the uniformed driver stepping out to open the back door. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," the driver said warmly. "Mr. Rhodes sends his regards." I smiled, not at the driver, but directly at my son. "Have a nice day, Michael," I said before sliding into the leather seat, His mug was still frozen mid-air when we pulled away. The office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of place I used to pass and wonder about. Daniel met me in the lobby, his presence somehow both reassuring and commanding. "Ready for your first day?" he asked. I was, more than ready. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of introductions, handshakes, and office tours. My role, community relations director, was a perfect fit. It was like running a classroom without the homework. I reviewed development proposals, drafted talking points for neighborhood meetings, and even mediated a dispute between two project managers before lunch. By the afternoon, I was sitting in my new corner office, sunlight streaming through wide windows, thinking about how surreal it all felt. I was no longer the woman tucked away in a basement. I had my own desk, my own phone line, my own authority, and with each task I completed, my confidence grew. At 3:00 p.m., my desk phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach sink. Michael's number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom, where are you?" His tone was sharp, almost frantic. "At work," I said evenly. "Work? What work? You haven't had a job in 15 years. I glanced out the window, letting the silence stretch before answering. "Well, I do now." I could hear Vanessa's voice in the background, high-pitched and urgent. "We need to talk about the papers." Michael pressed. "The advisor is coming tonight, and we need your signature." "No, Michael," I said. "I won't be home for dinner, and I won't be signing anything. Not tonight, not ever." His voice spiked. "Mom, this is important. This is about your future security." I didn't flinch. "Yes, it is, and I'm taking care of it." I hung up before he could respond, my hand steady on the receiver. "Stissin." Daniel appeared in my doorway moments later, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Judging by your face, I'm guessing that was your son." I nodded. "They've arranged for a financial advisor to come tonight and collect my retirement money." Daniel set the coffee down, his eyes narrowing. "Do you want to stop them quietly, or make sure they know exactly what they've lost?" That question sat with me all afternoon. Quiet would be safer. Quiet would avoid escalation. But quiet was also how I ended up in that basement. And I was done with quiet. "I want them to see," I said finally. Daniel's mouth curved into the kind of smile I remembered from our younger days, mischievous, confident, a little dangerous. "Then let's make it memorable." By 5:00, I had a plan. Daniel invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant that happened to sit on the main route between my old house and the freeway. The timing would be perfect just as the advisor was realizing I wasn't coming. Michael might drive by and see me in the window, dining with my boss, or rather, as Daniel would later call himself, your boyfriend. At 6:30, I stood in my new apartment's bathroom. Yes, my apartment, courtesy of Daniel's company, housing, wearing a black dress I'd forgotten I owned. I applied lipstick that made me feel 10 years younger and slipped on the pearl earrings William had given me decades ago. Tonight wasn't just about dinner, it was my first public move on a new chessboard. Daniel picked me up in his personal car, a sleek silver Mercedes that purred down the street. "You look beautiful," he said as I slid into the seat. "Not tired, beautiful." The restaurant was everything Michael and Vanessa would consider too good for me. Crystal stemware, linen tablecloths, waiters who moved like shadows. We ordered wine, and when our glasses clinked, I felt a surge of something warm and electric. To second chances, Daniel toasted. "To not settling for less than we deserve," I replied. As the city lights spread out beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, I realized I wasn't just escaping the basement. I was stepping back into the version of myself I thought I'd lost. And somewhere across town, in the house I'd paid for, Michael and Vanessa were staring at an empty chair and a canceled appointment. They thought they'd cornered me, but tonight proved something important. They weren't even playing the same game anymore. I had my own board now, and it was my turn to move next. The next morning, the air in my apartment felt lighter, as if the city itself had exhaled for me. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, catching on the steam from my coffee. I was already dressed in beige slacks and a cream blouse, ready to face my second day at Rhodes Development. The phone on the counter buzzed. I didn't even have to check the screen. I knew it would be Michael. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was clipped, the same tone he used as a teenager when he'd been caught doing something wrong, but hadn't figured out his excuse yet. About what, I asked, keeping my voice pleasant. About last night. He said, "You didn't come home. The advisor was waiting. And you," I cut him off. "Michael, I told you, I'm not signing anything." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "You're being unreasonable." "Vanessa is Vanessa," I interrupted. "Is not my concern. My retirement fund is not her project, or yours." Silence. I could almost hear him weighing his next move. The way a chess player studies the board before realizing his queen is trapped. "This isn't like you," he said finally, his voice turning softer, almost coaxing. "You've always trusted me." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. "Trust is earned, Michael, and you spent the last 3 months spending it like it was your credit limit." I ended the call before he could respond, feeling the satisfying click, like punctuation at the end of a perfectly crafted sentence. At the office, Daniel was waiting in my doorway before I'd even set my bag down. "You look like a woman who just established boundaries," he said with a half smile. I told him about the call, about Michael's change in tone, from demanding to pleading. Daniel listened without interrupting, then asked, "Do you want to keep playing defense, or is it time to go on offense?" The word offense had a weight to it. Defense kept me in a basement. Offense could put me back in my house, or in a better one. "Offense," I said. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with Kristen Thompson, the elder law attorney Daniel had recommended. Her voice was crisp and confident, the kind of tone that makes you believe she could dismantle an argument in 3 sentences. I told her everything: the deed transfer for $1, the temporary arrangement in the basement, the push to sign over my retirement fund. "That's classic elder financial abuse," she said without hesitation. "We can file to reverse the deed. The retirement fund issue is even more straightforward if you haven't signed. They have no claim." The word reverse sent a jolt through me. It meant the house could be mine again. Kristen explained the process, the documents she'd need, the timelines. "We'll also put them on notice," she added. "No more contact about your finances, if they try. We treat it as harassment." When I hung up, Daniel was leaning casually against the doorframe, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Good news?" he asked. "Potentially great news," I replied. I told him about the deed reversal, about the legal weight behind the word fraudulent. His grin widened. "Sounds like you're not just turning the tables, you're flipping the whole damn thing over." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, some project plans, but every so often, my thoughts drifted to Michael. I wondered if he was pacing the kitchen, trying to figure out why his mother wasn't bending the way she used to. I wondered if Vanessa was calling her friends, complaining about how difficult I'd become. And I realized, with a quiet rush of satisfaction, that I didn't care. That evening, I walked to the corner market near my apartment. The cashier, a young woman with a tattoo sleeve and a nose ring, greeted me like I was a regular in the basement. I'd avoided errands like this, too many questions about why I looked tired, too many chances of running into people who remembered me in better days. Now, I lingered in the aisles, choosing fresh vegetables, a bottle of wine, even a small bouquet of flowers for the table. Back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city shift from daylight to neon. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Michael. "We need to fix this before it gets ugly." I typed a reply. "Too late. It's already ugly, and I'm fixing it." Then I set the phone down, turned it face down, and let the city lights keep me company. The basement was behind me now, but the fight wasn't over. The difference was, I was no longer on their board. I had my own pieces, my own strategy, and an ally in Daniel who knew exactly how to play the long game. If Michael thought I'd quietly hand over my future, he was about to find out what his mother was really capable of when someone pushed her too far. And something told me when the next move came, it wouldn't just be a game changer, it would be checkmate. By Thursday morning, the city felt different under my feet. Maybe it was the way the autumn wind cut through my jacket, or the smell of fresh coffee from the corner cafe, but I felt taller, steadier, like a woman walking towards something instead of running from it. I was halfway through reviewing a stack of community feedback reports when Alice, Daniel's secretary, poked her head into my office. "There's a Jeremy Carter on line 1, she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He says he's your son. Also says it's urgent." The word urgent felt like bait on a hook. Daniel was standing just outside my office, catching enough of the exchange to raise an eyebrow. "Put him through," I said, my voice calm. "Mom." Michael's voice came sharp through the speakerphone. "We need to verify your employment with Rhodes Development." His tone was clipped. "Suspicious." "Why?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Because it doesn't make sense. You're 68, you haven't worked in years, and suddenly you've got some high-paying job with a corner office that's not normal." Before I could answer, Daniel stepped inside and closed the door. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "This is Daniel Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Development. Your mother is our Director of Community Relations, and she's doing exceptional work. Is there something you'd like clarified?" The silence that followed was almost comical. "You're her boss?" Michael asked, his voice wobbling. "Among other things," Daniel replied, his tone light but edged with steel. "She's an asset to this company, and she's in excellent hands." "I need to speak to my mother privately," Michael muttered. Daniel glanced at me, and I nodded for him to leave. When the door clicked shut, I picked up the handset. "What is it?" "Michael." "This isn't right." "Mom, Vanessa thinks I don't care what Vanessa thinks." I cut in, my voice steady. "My retirement fund is not yours. My home is not yours. And my life is certainly not yours to manage." His breathing quickened, the sound of a man realizing the leash he thought he had is gone. "You're making a mistake. If you'd just sign." "Stop." The word cracked like a whip. "I've spoken to a lawyer. What you and Vanessa have done is called elder financial abuse. It's a felony. I haven't decided yet whether to file charges, but I will if you push me." The pause was long enough for me to imagine him pacing, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when cornered. "What do you want?" There it was, the shift. He wasn't demanding anymore. He was negotiating. "I want my house back. The deed transfer reversed. You and Vanessa out within 30 days. You return the property in the condition it was in when I handed you the keys, and you never again attempt to access my finances." "That's not possible." "It's more than possible. It's your only option if you want to avoid seeing me in court. And if you're worried about what Lily will think, you can explain to her why you thought stealing from her grandmother was a good idea." He tried again, softer this time. "She'll hate us. Then you should have thought about that before you put me in a basement and tried to take my savings." There was a shuffle of noise, like he was covering the phone. Vanessa's voice leaked through faintly, sharp and frantic. When he came back on, he sounded smaller. "I need to talk to Vanessa. I'll call you tomorrow." "You have until Friday at noon," I said. "After that, my lawyer files the reversal and the criminal complaint." I hung up without waiting for a reply. The click loud in my own ears. Bouffia. By the time Daniel returned with 2 fresh coffees, I was almost smiling. "That went well?" he asked, setting a cup in front of me. "It went," I said, "and now the clock is ticking for them." That night, I didn't go home and replay every cruel word or manipulative smile from the past 3 months. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the balcony door, and let the cool air wash over me. The city was alive with lights and movement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of it again. In the basement, I'd been shrinking. Now, I was expanding, filling the space I'd been told I didn't deserve. And soon, I'd be standing in my own doorway again, not as a guest, not as a tenant in my son's charity, but as the rightful owner who'd taken her life back. Michael thought he knew how to play me, but what he didn't understand was that I'd been studying his game all along. And when Friday came, I was ready to end it on my terms. Friday morning arrived with a kind of electric stillness, like the pause before a storm breaks. I was at my desk by 8:00, coffee in hand, scanning community meeting notes when my phone buzzed with a text from Kristen, my attorney. Remember, don't agree to anything without me reviewing it. If they call, keep it short and document everything. Ban. By 9:15, I'd already caught myself glancing at the clock. Noon was my deadline. But I wasn't the one on edge. Somewhere across town, Michael and Vanessa were probably pacing their pristine kitchen, trying to decide if they'd rather face my lawyer or swallow the bitter pill of surrender. I hoped they were sweating. At 10:00, Daniel appeared in my doorway. He didn't bother with small talk, just set a cup of coffee on my desk and leaned against the frame. "How's our countdown looking?" he asked. "Quiet so far," I replied. "But give it time. They'll call." He gave me that half smile I was learning meant he already had a plan. "I've blocked my calendar until 1. If they call, I'll be right here." There was something grounding about knowing he was in my corner, not as a savior, but as someone who trusted me to fight my own battles while making sure I didn't fight them alone. At 11:03, my office phone lit up with Michael's number. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Hello, Michael." His voice was tight, deliberate. "We've talked it over. We'll sign the paperwork to transfer the deed back. But 30 days is impossible. We need more time." "Ushinets." "No," I said simply. The silence on his end stretched. "Mom, be reasonable. Lily's school year, 30 days, I repeated, and the property returned to the condition it was in when I gave it to you." He exhaled sharply, the sound of someone recalculating their odds. 60 days. That's the best we can do. I glanced at the clock. 11:07. You have 53 minutes to agree to 30 days. Or I hand everything over to Kristen and she files today. Vanessa's voice erupted faintly in the background, sharp, urgent, panicked. I could almost picture her gripping the phone, hissing instructions, while Michael tried to keep his composure. "Fine," he said finally. The word dragged out like it had been pulled from him with pliers. 30 days. I reached for my pen, jotting down the exact time and terms. "And Michael, from now on, all communication goes through Kristen. If you need her number, I'll have her call you." "Yeah." "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, almost pleading now. "We're family. Family doesn't put you in a basement and try to steal your future." I replied. "We'll see if there's anything worth salvaging after you hand over the keys." I hung up before he could answer. Daniel must have been listening from the hall, because he stepped inside the moment I set the phone down. That sounded like checkmate. He said, "It's the first round." I corrected, though the truth was, I could feel something uncoiling inside me, a weight I'd been carrying for months starting to lift. By noon, Kristen had the signed agreement in her inbox. The reversal process was in motion, and the countdown had begun. 30 days from now, Michael and Vanessa would be out of my house. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a little Italian place near my apartment. I ordered fresh pasta and a glass of red wine, savoring every bite. Around me, the low hum of conversation and clink of cutlery felt like a reminder that life was still rich and full beyond the walls of that basement. As I walked home, I passed a store window filled with plants, ferns, orchids, even a tall fiddle-leaf fig. I stopped, imagining the sunlight streaming into my living room once I was back in my own space. a few green leaves catching the light. For months, my life had been stripped down to bare walls and concrete floors. Soon, I'd have color again. When I got in, I placed Kristen's email, printed and signed, on the small table by my door. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a promise. 30 days from now, I wouldn't just get my house back, I'd get myself back. And Michael, he'd learned that the woman he thought he could manipulate into silence wasn't just walking away, she was walking back in, head held high, and locking the door behind her. The 30 days that followed were a strange mix of patience and quiet satisfaction. Every morning, I marked an X on the calendar hanging in my apartment kitchen. Each red slash pulling me closer to the day Michael and Vanessa would have to hand over what they'd tried to steal. Kristen handled all the legal back and forth, which meant my phone stayed blissfully silent, except for her updates and the occasional check-in from Daniel. By the second week, the tone of Kristen's emails shifted from firm to almost amused. They've asked for an extension twice, she wrote one morning, both times. I've reminded them the agreement is binding. They know they're cornered. That line, "they know they're cornered," became my private mantra. At work, I threw myself into the role, like it had been waiting for me all along. I organized a community meeting for one of Daniel's projects, mediated a heated zoning discussion, and even got a handwritten thank you note from a neighborhood leader who'd been skeptical about our plans. Every time I stood in front of a group, clear and confident, I thought about how small I'd felt in that basement and how far I'd come since. 3 days before the deadline, Kristen called. They've scheduled the key exchange for Friday at 10 a.m. I'll be there with you. My hand tightened around the phone. What's their mood, I asked. Kristen chuckled, resigned, and a little bitter. If I'm being honest, they've been painting over walls and moving furniture all week. It sounds like they're trying to erase their time there before you walk back in. Friday morning arrived crisp and bright. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn on my first day at Rhodes Development, not as armor, but as a reminder of the day I stepped out of their shadow. Daniel insisted on driving me, his silver Mercedes gleaming in the sun. Moral support, he said when I protested. Besides, I want to see their faces. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the curtains had changed again, bland beige instead of the ones I'd chosen years ago. The flower beds I'd tended were overrun with weeds. It stung, but only for a moment, because this was no longer a place where I'd been exiled to the basement. This was a place I was reclaiming. Kristen was already waiting at the curb, her briefcase in hand. Ready, she asked. More than ready, I said. Michael opened the door before we could knock. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Vanessa hovered behind him, her smile thin enough to cut glass. Here, Michael said, holding out the keys. I didn't take them right away. I'll need to walk through the house first, I said, my voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. Kristen followed me inside, clipboard in hand, noting anything that wasn't as I'd left it. The living room furniture was gone, leaving faint outlines on the carpet where my oak coffee table had once sat. The kitchen looked sterile, stripped of the warmth I'd poured into it over decades. Downstairs, the basement still smelled faintly of damp concrete. My cot was gone, but the outline of where it had sat was clear against the dusty floor. When we returned to the front door, I took the keys from Michael, the metal cool against my palm. 30 years I worked for this house, I said quietly, looking from him to Vanessa. You had it for 3 months, and you tried to take everything. Michael opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Don't. This isn't a conversation. This is me telling you that you will never have another chance to do this to me or anyone else again. Kristen stepped forward. Per the agreement, you have until noon to vacate. My client will return at 12:01 to take possession. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. Michael muttered something that sounded like fine, and they both brushed past us, heading toward the garage. Once they were gone, I stepped outside. the keys still in my hand. Daniel smiled from the car. How does it feel? I looked at him, then back at the house. Like freedom. I said, hard-earned, and mine. At exactly 12:01, I unlocked the front door. The air inside was different now, not because they'd left, but because I'd taken it back. I walked room to room, opening curtains, letting sunlight flood in. In the kitchen, I set a vase of fresh flowers on the counter. In the living room, I opened the windows wide, letting the breeze carry out the last traces of them. Later, as I stood in the doorway with Daniel and Kristen, I realized this wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about never again letting anyone shrink my world to fit their convenience. Michael and Vanessa had bet on me being too old, too tired, too afraid to fight. They'd mistaken kindness for weakness, trust for gullibility, and now they were the ones standing outside, looking in, wondering how it all slipped away. I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock sounding exactly like what it was, the final move in a game they thought they'd already won. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't just surviving, I was home. Taking back my house wasn't just about reclaiming a piece of property, it was about reclaiming myself. The basement, the manila folder, the quiet manipulations. They were all chapters in a story I never thought I'd have to tell. But standing here now, sunlight streaming through my own windows, I know exactly why I had to fight. I fought because no one, family or not, has the right to strip you of your independence. I fought because dignity isn't something you can store in a box or tuck away in a damp room. And I fought because once you let someone take the first piece, they'll keep carving away until there's nothing left. Now, when I walk through these rooms, I see more than the life I built. I see the woman who refused to be erased, the woman who learned that age doesn't make you weaker, it makes you wiser, sharper, and far less willing to tolerate lies. If you've ever been in a place where you felt small, where someone tried to convince you that your worth was theirs to decide, I hope my story reminds you you can take it back. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it will be worth it. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't just winning, it's walking back through your own front door with your head held high.